All right, Kevin, back with you for another episode of the Million Dollar Relationships Podcast. And today I have got my longtime friend, Jeff Spencer, Dr. Jeff Spencer. Jeff, welcome, man. So awesome to have you here today.
Well, we've never had a bad moment, Kevin. So it's just absolutely an honor and a pleasure to be here with you. I covet every second that we have been able to spend together over the last, should I say, 10 or 12 years.
It's
just
been a while, hasn't it?
It's well, I look in the mirror and I wonder, who is this guy? I don't know what I'm supposed to feel like, but who knows?
Well, you and I reconnected recently after having not had any conversation or communication for a while.
Yeah.
And I thought it was so cool because we just picked up right
We did, totally.
without missing a beat,
Right. Exactly. How was that dinner anyhow, Kevin? Yeah, that was fantastic.
Yeah. And it's so interesting that because the episode, so this is episode number 98 of the Million Dollar Relationships Podcast. Episode 97 was with Perry Marshall.
Great name.
And there is a correlation. So do you even know who Perry is or anything?
I do.
Okay.
I do.
So there's beyond the business connection, there's a real personal connection between both you, and there's a tie between you and Perry, because about 10 years ago, we've got this orphanage down in Jamaica that we support and stuff through our family foundation. And we had taken a trip down there as a family, and we had spent this day at the orphanage. And on the way back to the hotel in the bus that evening, my wife announces, honey, I want to adopt. And after I got over I think, Jeff, I think I about had a heart attack when she said that.
Rightly so.
My thought thing, my initial thought is like, what are you even talking about? What are you? I was like, honey, we got 6 kids. We're good, And so there was like, I could not relate to that comment, not one dang bit, And but I was like, so and she went on, she goes, honey, she goes, we can't change the life of every kid, but she goes, we certainly can change the life of one. And we can give one child a real leg up that they wouldn't have if it weren't for us. And, I don't think that this is something that a guy gives thought to. I'm like, hey, and tells his wife, hey, I want to adopt. I think this is a woman thing, really. But the first guy I thought of was Perry Marshall, because I knew that he and his wife had adopted. And I'm like, shit, I got to talk to Perry about this, and I got to get some counsel here. I got to, and so I actually texted Perry, and within 24 hours of me texting him and I were having a conversation on the phone, and he's like, okay, tell me what happened. I told him, he starts chuckling. And he's like, yep. He's like, that's it. He's like, this isn't a guy thought, this is a woman thought. And you and I, we're just the reluctant husband is what we are, but he started telling me about his experience with this. And he's like, Kevin, I'm going to tell you, he's like, my response to Laura was about the same as yours. I'm like, what are you talking about? But once I opened my mind to it and we started, exploring this, and he's like, and now that we've done it, he's like, it's been an absolutely amazing experience. And you and I got connected, and it just so we met through Genius Network, and you lived in California, and it just so happened that I was coming down to California for a strategic coach workshop. And that particular weekend, I know that I go to strategic coach on Friday. I had brought Lisa with me because we were going to stay through the weekend and just enjoy Santa Monica and stuff. And you lived in the area, and so you were like, "Well, heck, you're coming in. I'll meet you at the hotel." And we just got together, and somehow or another we get onto this topic of adoption and stuff. And we come to find out that you had adopted too, and of course the 3 of us had a really awesome conversation about that as we sat there in the hotel lobby,
Beautiful.
And that was real. And so, I look at this whole thing, and it's interesting. I don't usually share this much when doing the interviews for this podcast, but this podcast, I titled it $1 Million Relationships when I started doing this. And yet, yeah, I mean, it is about business relationships. It is about how, when we value relationships, how valuable they can really be to us. But it's so much more than a dollar figure, and of course, every episode we do, we demonstrate that. But it's really interesting that how this has come around, and there's so much personal benefit as well. And so I'm just really excited to have this conversation with you. You hold a very special place in my heart. And I know you and I were talking before that we hit the record button, and I had mentioned my friend Tim Paulson at one time. Hey Kev, if somebody asks how you're doing and stuff, you can just respond, unbelievable, because that covers it all. Highs to lows and everything in between. Of course, you and I were like, how's the adoption going? Unbelievable, because it is, like you said, a full spectrum thing. It is so rewarding, and it is also it's challenging, and there's a lot to it. But I would not trade this experience for nothing. And I am so thankful, Jeff, for you, for our friendship, for our business relationship, for that conversation that you and I and Lisa had almost 10 years ago at the Lamerigo in Santa Monica.
Well, back at you, Kev. That's all I can say.
Yeah. So with that, what I'd like to just kind of turn over to you a little bit. You have just such an amazing background and such an amazing experience. I want to have you share a little bit about, what you do, who you serve, what inspires you to do what you do, and just kind of set some context and let us know, who is Jeff Spencer?
Well, thanks, Kevin. Maybe I'll start with what I do. I basically work with very high performing entrepreneurs, and I basically help them win big without blowing themselves up. And that's always a risk, and that's always a challenge. And what I found and what the characteristics of my clients are is that, number one, they have explicit clarity, confidence, and also certainty, because they know exactly where they are. They know exactly what that means. They know exactly what's coming, and they know exactly what to do to be able to create a life of passion, purpose, productivity, and prosperity without blowing themselves up. And that's basically what I do. And I do this from a very comprehensive, full spectrum view of the person as a composite of their personal professional life. Like, you can have a coach that's an expert in one area. That's great. We need them. Like when I work with you too, Bono at his voice coach. It can also be a mentor. You can have a life mentor, but both the coach and the mentor, they're missing something. That's the totality of the experience of the individual taken as a composite, as a whole. And then we have this kind of rarefied air advisory entity that I call the corner man, that people have named me being that, because if you go to the movie Rocky had the old guy in his corner named Mickey. And Mickey in real time was observing how Rock was performing in the ring, kind of like we all do, slugging it out day in and day out. And Rocky, considering everything, both personally and professionally, was able to tell Rocky what to do to be able to avoid the knockout blow, and perhaps even deliver the knockout blow to become champion of the world. And that's what I do for individuals, teams, and organization. And it's a very unique specialty, because you have to at least be 60 years old to have enough experience in the space of life to be the advisor that people need to hear about. How do I avoid the preventable problem? How do I seize the best opportunities? How do I create that level of certainty in my life? And that's what I do for my clients. And probably this evolved out of my history. When I was 7, I wanted to become an Olympic athlete.
Okay.
Didn't know how I was going to do it, but then I showed some unusual talent at the age of 11 on a bicycle. It's like, well, maybe this is how I'm going to do it. And I was gifted with an angel that came into my life, who was my cycling coach, who chose me. And he said, look, Jeff, here's the deal. I want you to come and train with my group. They're all Olympians and world champions, but I want you to come and train with us, because I want you to be around this environment, so you hear what the conversations really are and what it really takes to become a world champion or an Olympic champion. And so I was around that, and being around that, they didn't put anything into me, but they awoken something that was already inside me.
Mhm.
And he told me, well, that, first off, learning or winning is a learned skill. We're going to teach you how to do this. So he taught me well. And 10 years later, I did become an Olympian. And that's important because if you're going to advise people at the top, you better know what the top's like. And it has to be imparted into every DNA molecule in your body. You can't just study it and read about it and be it and advise people to become it. It's not possible. It's got to be part of where you came from in your DNA. And then en route to becoming an Olympian, I was also University of Southern California, where I was studying sports science on an academic scholarship because I had some brains, but I come from a welfare family, so they couldn't afford me to go anywhere. But my scholastic ability allowed me to do that, and that gave me a rich understanding in the sports medicine world that was essential for me to understand what it takes to uh, develop the body and the mind necessary to become a competitive champion in any discipline, whether it's sports, entertainment, or business itself. It kind of like really doesn't matter. And when I was 18, I met my second angel, who was a Victorian born in the late 1890s, and he was a true Renaissance man. He knew everything about everything, and he was also the founder of an entirely new way of doing art glass sculpture. And he chose me to be the apprentice to him while he created his art masterpieces. And what he did during our breaks, he filled me up with classical music. He read the poets to me, the great poets of history. He helped me understand and read the great classic literature of our time, and also listen to classical music. So there was this whole exposure to this other way of life that I wasn't aware of, but yet I had the affinity and the capacity to absorb, along with what I was learning how to win as a learned skill from my cycling coach. And the third kind of angel that came into my life was when I was about a year out from becoming an Olympian, who was in the cycling world to help develop the sport. He didn't know anything about training, but he taught me about heart and soul. And he taught me about human dignity and how you show up in service and how you be the best that you can be to showcase to other people what's possible in this dimension. And I found out later, because I love this guy, and I wondered about his dignity, and I found out that he was in a concentration camp in World War II, exposed to the most cruelest acts of inhumanity possible. But he taught me that which he learned through that. And so with those three pivotal influences in my life, and then you kind of add that up over 20 or 30, 40, 50 years, then you develop the capacity to be able to be an advisor at a very high level about what to do when to convert opportunity into personal successes and create the best legacy possible. And that's how I got from where I was to kind of like where I am like right now.
Yeah. And I want to just kind of point out something that you didn't necessarily touch on in all of that, is that like you have been called on in a number of times where, I mean, and I won't talk about names or anything like that, but where somebody who is a high performer was in a situation where they absolutely had to perform without fail, without, I mean, they had to do it perfect, and they had to do it perfect like now.
Yeah, right,
And you were called into those kind of situations. And
right, right. Yeah, well, I appreciate that a lot. Yeah, it's one thing I'm really good at. It's like if you have an opportunity to score big and you got the ball on the 1 yard line and you don't know what play to call, well, you want me on your team because I can figure out what that is and how to execute it to get that ball in the end zone. And likewise, if you're starting to get confused and you're starting to get lost and you're kind of losing contact with the front pack, I can go in there and figure out what that is and what do we do about it. And then once we do the whatever about it, then it's a matter of weeding the garden once you get to the top to be able to stay there, which I'm very good at as well. So, I mean, quite honestly, Kevin, and in 60 years in the advisory space, there's kind of like nothing that I haven't seen in real time, and working with some of the most prolific achievers of our time behind the scenes, helping them create the iconic place that they hold in history, has allowed me to have that special insight and gift to be able to do that. And I'll also mention that what I learned from adopting our daughter was incalculable in learning the humanity skill of, why am I in this game? What am I doing? And what's the ultimate meaning and purpose behind it? And if you ever question the value of anything that you say and anything that you do as a human, man. Adopt a kid, because they hang on your every word, and we're responsible. In my opinion, we're responsible not just for saving a life, but for manifesting a potential. And I don't think there's anything more rewarding in my experience than to do that. It's the hardest thing I ever done by a factor of 1,000. I mean, becoming an Olympian was easy in terms of what the difficulty was. And working with our daughter, when we adopted her and brought her to America from Colombia, she didn't speak English, we didn't speak Spanish, so we had no language. We had primitive sign language, that was it. But we found a way. And she had severe malnutrition from being starved literally for like 10 years and being raised as an animal, literally, and being raised as a liar, a cheat, and a thief. I mean, because what else are you going to do, like in a third world rural country that's the drug capital of the universe? And so it's a bleak prognosis for people, like that. But I can honestly say that we fought really hard for 10 years, and my wife cried every day for 9 years and 10 months. It was so difficult, literally cried our eyes out every day, but we didn't cave. Most people that do what we did, they give the kid back in a year and then they get divorced. It's so disruptive. But we were kind of strong of constitution, and we did what had to go right to fulfill our obligation to what we believed that our daughter deserved to have. And the other thing I want to say here, because this is about $1 million, but I was making that before we adopted her. But the moment we adopted her, I told my wife, look, she doesn't have any language. I mean, she doesn't have any school, parasitic ridden body, every strike against her known to humanity based upon her history and background. I said, this is a formidable foe, man. And it's like, if we're going to be of service in a way that we need to be, I'm a gold medal sort of guy, Kevin. You know me, I don't go for bronze medals. Mm-hmm. I said, you know what, I'm going to have to forfeit and surrender 90% of my occupation starting today to be her dad. Mm-hmm. And 90% of our income went away for 10 years, just because that's what it took to be able to do what was necessary to keep my daughter in the game. So it's sort of ironic, because I don't qualify financially in a certain way for certain memberships and stuff, because I don't meet the minimum standard in a certain sense. But, I preferred to pay my dues in a slightly different way that I can honestly say was the most important thing that I've ever done in my life. And there's several things I learned, if I could just share this very quickly. I learned, first off, you can love anybody. You just decide you're going to do it. You don't need a special reason to do it. There doesn't need to be any reciprocity. It's really a one-way street that rewards itself. And I also realized that, you have to trust the process, because in life, many times, the only guarantee you've got is the decisions that you will be making moment to moment. And there's not a lot of visibility or assurance that things are going to get any better. There isn't. So what are you going to do? You're going to wait for a better time to do it when the time's now? No, man. I mean, you step into it and you do what you got to do to be able to execute what has to go right to keep things moving. Yeah. And you got to trust that process. And I also learned that, there's always enough energy in anything to do anything on behalf of another person. There's always enough energy to do it. I also learned that you better decide how you're going to show up each and every day, and how you're going to greet and how you're going to interact with people, because what we do and say and how we show up does matter. And had people showed up differently for my daughter, she wouldn't have had the emotional scars from physical and emotional and mental trauma that she didn't ask for. She didn't ask for any of that stuff. She's a great kid, but that was imposed on her from the outside. And I just feel like every day we got to decide, how am I going to show up? And probably the most important thing is that you never withhold the possibility of a miracle. You got to always hold that card, and you got to hold it close, because I feel like we did have one when one day our daughter woke up and she was different, and I knew that she was going to make it. So a little bit of a sidebar here, but I think an important one, that had I not had that opportunity to be involved in that experience, the richness of my life would certainly not be what it is today.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that happen?
Being an adoptive parent now for 8 years, I can just totally relate to so much of what you shared, and somebody else who's an entrepreneur can relate to it on one level. Somebody who is an entrepreneur and an adoptive parent can relate on another level too. Yeah. And you're right, and what you said about how we show up.
Yeah.
I've been through some dark periods in my life, no doubt. And I also discovered that during some of those times, it was me self-inflicting a lot of what was going on.
Yeah.
And that if I can make a decision in how I'm going to respond about things and how I'm going to show up. And when I really started to understand the power of that I had control over so much more than I thought I did, or that I realized that I did. And that by making a conscious effort that I'm going to show up in a certain way, it was very interesting to watch how people reciprocated,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
it's not a spoken thing.
No.
We might be saying all the same things,
Yeah.
but the way we show up is different, and
Yes.
people just recognize that.
Yeah.
It's like a spidey sense or an intuition or whatever you want to call it, where, women are really, that person made me feel, Lisa will say that to me on occasion. I don't like that. They just made me, it's cringy, or whatever. And I'm like, she's way more into it, because I'm like, it just goes right past me, sometimes, but I've experienced this now, in that how I show up
Yes.
makes all the difference in the world in how people
Yes.
respond. And
100%.
it's huge. It's huge.
100%. Yeah. It's like when we come from our truth to inform people about what our truth is, without any attempt or without any sense to try to convert anybody, try to convince anybody of anything, but to only share with them our perspective.
Yeah.
It's amazing how differently that they hear us. And the beauty of that is that when we can come from that, however they react to what we're saying is on them, because there's nothing that we could have done that would have provoked anything other than, oh, okay, if it's elation and joy, or whether it's disappointment and condemnation, that's all on them. And I just feel that it's really important that we walk away from every interaction kind of knowing that there's nothing that we did that would have provoked a response that then we would not have knowledge of what we actually exchange with the individual. We may feel guilty for no reason.
Mm-hmm.
And I found, again, the antidote for that is to be able to show up and ask yourself, what is it that I really think about what I'm going to respond and how I'm going to language what I'm doing? And you're right. When you come from that space, then the presence of you shows up, and it has an impact that maybe speaks louder than any words could ever do.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I want to shift the conversation just a little bit. And you've kind of alluded to some stuff and to some people already,
Mhm.
but I want to just, so I'm going to reiterate the question for the benefit of
Yeah, perfect.
listeners. Have you ever been introduced to a person that completely changed the course of your life or your business, so much so that much of what you have or much of what you've experienced to this day would not be possible if not for this person? And, Jeff, for me, this is always, I love asking this question.
It's a great question.
I love hearing people's story and response and experience around this. And I'm especially excited to hear yours, because I've just long been impressed by you and the work that you do. And you and I have never had this conversation. I've never asked you this question before. So I get to be the beneficiary as much as anybody listening to this gets to be right now.
Yeah, well, I guess there's a lot of ways of answering this, but I think I'll have to defer back to my second angel. And he was the Victorian that was a Renaissance man that shared with me the more nuanced parts of life that I had an inclination to be able to absorb. And he loved me like a son. And the last time I saw my dad, when I was 13, and I met him when I was 18, he was 76.
Wow.
And, life was brutal for me because I kind of took over the husband role at 13, 14. That was just a severe stress on me for all sorts of reasons. But I was having a bad day, and he said to me, "Man, Jeff, it looks like you're having a really bad day. Would you like a helping hand?" And have you ever had that situation, Kevin, where somebody said something and you felt like, man, this guy's reading my mind? I mean, how did he know that I needed that?
Mm-hmm.
And I said to him, I don't know how to express my thanks for this, but if there's ever a day that I could use a helping hand, it's today. And I haven't had many good ones, as you well know, kind of referring to my history. And he said, I just want to be sure that you want a helping hand. I said, 100% yes. And he said, well, if you want a helping hand, you got one at the end of each arm. And he turned around, he walked out of the room.
Wow.
And I sat there and I said, well, it's not exactly what I expected.
Yeah.
But when he said that, I knew instantaneously that it was the right thing to do, because he was not going to intervene in my finding a way to develop the confidence and belief in myself that I could find a way beyond this.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew that he knew that if he did it, he would have neutered me, castrated me from that experience. And, you know, after I realized that, that was kind of like a non-thought process, but I felt myself starting to stand up a little bit straighter, you know, a little bit posture. My chest pooched out a little bit. There was like, wait a minute here. Like, why am I on this planet? Why am I given a brain? Why am I given creativity? Why am I given ingenuity? Why am I given resourcefulness, curiosity? Well, I mean, those assets that we all have are obviously put there for us to be able to find a way beyond whatever it is that we're faced with. And I was stuck with that, and I found a way beyond it. And I knew that he loved me enough to not get in my way. Absolutely pivotal moment, like bar none.
Wow.
And I owe so much to him for turning his back on me for all the right reasons. And that's why I love this man today.
Wow. So what are one or two of the things that stand out most in your mind, you know, now? How many years ago was that? I mean, that's been a number of years. That's quite a while ago.
Yeah, well, I was 18. I'm 71 now. So whatever
Yeah.
the math is on that, it was a long time ago.
A long time ago. Yeah,
Yeah.
over 50 years ago. So what are there's one or two things that have transpired because of that experience that, you know, hands down, would have never transpired if that experience would have not taken place?
Well, for sure, I never would have made an Olympic team
Mm-hmm.
because I may not have trusted myself to find a way to do it, because, you know, the Olympics is not a casual thing. I mean, it's a very serious situation that requires immense dedication, you know, and I don't think you're forfeiting anything. You're actually gaining something by committing to something that's that big. But, you know, the odds of me becoming an Olympian were 360 million to 1, you know, but I didn't really think about that. I just thought about the process. And had I not had the confidence in my ability to show up and find a way, it would have never happened, because at a certain point, you can't rely on other people to pedal your bike for you. You know, you got to have the ability, and you got to know you have the ability to find a way to get the job done under any given sets of circumstances. So, and the same thing for my glass career. You know, I developed my glass career based upon being his apprentice, and I ultimately showed in the best galleries in New York City and the best glass shows in the world. I mean, literally, not many people know that, but that would have never happened because I wouldn't have had the persistence to stay in the game long enough to not give up. You know, giving up was never an option once I realized that we have a limitless capacity to have the assets and be able to find a way beyond anything. That would never have happened. The adoption of my daughter would have never happened. The me going back to school and becoming International Sports Chiropractor of the Year, because of the innovation that I brought to the discipline, that would never have happened had it not been for him. It's because he told me, Jeff, he didn't say this in words, but literally it was conveyed to me that I got everything that I need. I got my tools, I got my brain, I got the assets that come along with the brain. You know, I should be able to do this by myself. And he's given me permission to do it. He believes enough in me to not get in my way. It would have never happened, Kevin, like without that. And, you know, today I'm still in the game at my age where most people are, you know, talking about their bowel habits and their medicines and their surgery stuff. And, you know, I don't, the thought of being around people my age, I find horrifying, actually, you know. So it gave me a youthful vitality of exuberant possibility that was for sure ignited at that moment in time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You know, a lot of people listening to this may have had an experience, you know, there some kind of experience like that,
For sure.
something like that, and yet the story that they've been telling themselves about that experience is not the story that you just now shared, you know.
Yeah.
What would you say to someone? Because I can think of personal friends. I can think of one family member in particular uh, who lost somebody near and dear to them years ago. And the story that they've been telling themselves ever since is, I'll never meet another person like them to
Mm-hmm.
have a relationship with. And they never have.
Mm-hmm.
And it's probably been 40 years ago now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's so what, because we you know, it is about the story we get to tell ourselves, and in this case others. It's the story that the meaning that we choose to place. And so I think, you know, there's a reason that we got into this conversation. I just have a feeling that there's people out there that are like, damn, I've got this thing. And I just want you to touch on that a little bit, if you'd be all right with it.
I will. Yeah. Thank you for the opportunity here. But I think a fundamental point of understanding that we need to have is to understand our dual mentalities as being part of the human species. And what the observation is that there's two mentalities that we have that are opposing each other 24 hours a day. We've got what I call the human mindset, which is our survival self that's biologically hardwired into us. You may have been in a situation where somebody says something to you that you consider to be a threat psychologically, and you respond to them very quickly without even thinking, and you think what you said is awesome. But how often does what you say serve the purpose, or does it usually go south and disintegrates the relationship? I mean, it usually is the wrong thing that is said out of haste and reflex. And that's a survival impulse that we have built into us because the body's first priority is psychological and physical survival. And that has to be faster than we can think because we can't think fast enough to get ourselves out of harm's way in certain situations. Therefore, we have a biology that acts on our behalf, that's hardwired into us, that's on every second of our life, that will control our language in critical situations. And it's the same thing if we're in imminent physical danger, where survival is the imperative, because if we don't survive, then all of our ambitions don't matter because we're not going to get there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then we have a survival instinct as well. You may have had an experience where you drove a car through an intersection on the green light, somebody ran the red light, somehow you knew how to turn away from the car without hitting it head on, but you couldn't think your way fast enough to be able to avoid that crash. But yet something did allow you to do that that was so purposeful and so deliberate that it could not be an accident. And so therefore we also have this, again, physical and psychological reflex to be able to address any considered assault on us. That's something that we should all just acknowledge. The little voice on your shoulder, well, that's really not the real you. That's really the imposter you that's telling you the story of survival that always ends in disaster. But we have on the other side of it the second mentality, which I call the champion's mind. And a mind is like a living, breathing organism that can route, store, receive, interpret, edit, and transmit information in action in deliberate real time. That can be done, that overrides our survival reflexes to be able to create a life of excellence and meaning and contribution. So these two parts are at war with each other 24 hours a day. So when I hear someone has been told a story that ends in doom or keeps them small, I know that's their human mindset, that part of them, that survival part of them, telling them a story that usually is catastrophic and is not to their benefit. You could see how that could happen, correct?
Yeah.
And we cannot shut this off because it's part of our hardwiring that's on 24 hours a day, our entire life.
Yeah.
But the good news is that with our champion's mind, that part of us that has a desire and a thirst for creating a life of excellence, that does have final say. So as long as we apply the action that history tells us has to go right to push into the background the fake story that we're believing and telling ourselves That's the only way that we can move forward and beyond the stories that we are telling ourselves that aren't true, that are based upon survival, not excellence.
Yeah.
I hope that makes sense, but that's the low grade conflict that we all feel as a human day in and day out. We feel, should I do this? Should I do this? I don't know. I'm confused. I like myself. I hate myself. Pound up, pound down. We're always in conflict. And these two things are at war for control over our decision making.
Yeah.
So as long as we realize, this is the take home, we realize that we hear ourselves telling us a story that can't be true, that ends in catastrophe, and it shortcuts our ability to perform our best in outside of our potential on the downside. We know that it's coming from our survival self. There's no future in that other than to repeat history. You cannot make a create a life of excellence out of that. But if we do come from our champion's mind, that part of us, that conscious side of us that wants to create meaning and value and contribution in our life. Mm-hmm. And again, we do the actions that history tells us that if we do it, it particularly takes us from where we are to where we want to get to. That's how you transcend that. Without doing that, it would be impossible to get beyond the stories that we can't break away from unless we replace it and we push that into the background.
Yeah. Wow. That is really powerful. Well, thank you for touching on that. Jeff, for anybody listening to this going, man, Kev, I really like Jeff. I appreciate what he shared. I would love to, find out more about him and the work that he does. How can people do that, Jeff?
Yeah, well, thanks, Kevin. It's pretty simple, actually. I'm kind of obscure and kind of run stealth for things, but the best way to do it would be to go to my one-page website, which is www.drjeffspencer.com, drjeffspencer.com. And you're not going to see a lot there because, the people that reach out to me, it's kind of real simple. If you got a question, like to ask or whatever, you can just go to apply and you can fill out like an application, send it to me. There's no obligation at all. Or you can go to calldrjeff.com and you can go and you can schedule a phone call with me. We'll jump on a call and we'll see what's top of mind for you. And we'll sort of figure out how we might be able to collaborate to take you to your bigger future. Best way to do it.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Jeff, I really appreciate you taking the time to have this conversation. One of the, the goals, the goal in hosting this podcast has always been twofold: to give you, the people that I interview, the opportunity to share your story, your experience around this, and then for the listener, I want to inspire them to place a more intentional focus on creating more real, meaningful, rewarding, and profitable relationships in their lives. Because as entrepreneurs, relationships are our most valuable asset.
No doubt. No doubt.
So we have definitely delivered on that today, thanks to you. And any last words you want to share before we call it a wrap?
Yeah, if I may, I think it's always important to remember that there's always room at the top for the best. And it's like, I don't care what the economic conditions are or what the circumstances are outside of ourselves, as long as we're doing a couple things. Number one, let's make sure that we pursue that. Let me say this, is that like my definition of a champion is someone, it's a manifester of gifts, goals, and potential. And when that's kind of our higher aspiration, then we start playing the real game within what's possible for us. And we should never underestimate the value of our contribution to humanity based upon our skill set when developed and the contribution that makes, because there are certain people that are meant to go nano on things. There are certain people that are meant to go hyper macro. What's important is that we manifest the skills and the gifts that we have to make our best contribution to humanity. That's what levels the playing field. I'll also say this, Kevin, is that there's only one of us in all of creation. And since the first footprint on this planet, there's been estimated to be 350 billion people, but there's still only one Kevin. There's only one Jeff. There's only one of everyone in the audience listening to the podcast here. There is no other us in all of creation. And I think it's important that we be mindful of that, because if any one of us wants to influence a billion people, all we need to do is be the best at what we're best at. And because in the electronic world, we're literally probably a half a person away from everybody on the planet.
Yeah.
And we can safely say that anything that we do is not to be ever considered insignificant, because the ripple effect may seem small, but we don't know where it's going. So why don't we not decide what our impact is? Why don't we embrace what our gifts are and build those and build a life of meaning based upon those? That's about all I have to say, Kev.
Well, Jeff, I really appreciate that. Really appreciate you. And thanks again for taking the time to have this conversation. Really, this has been absolutely amazing. Thanks so much.
All right, Kev. Thank you. Onward and upward.
Onward.